I stood in the kitchen, my apron stained with grease, the smell of grilled meat and burnt bread clinging to my skin like a thin veil of smoke. Outside, cheerful music blasted from the Bluetooth speaker, mixing with the lively chatter of my parents and nearly 30 guests raising glasses to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. A big party, strung with twinkle lights and fresh flowers, hosted right in the backyard of our wooden house in the suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina. I, Christina, 33, am the eldest daughter, also the one who started setting up the tent before sunrise, carried every table and chair into the yard, hung every string light on the oak tree, and grilled countless batches of burgers for the big happy family, soaking in the festive mood. Lisa, my younger sister, was lounging on a wicker chair by the pool, sipping a cocktail her husband had mixed. Our youngest, Jack, was laughing with the kids, and no one cared that I was still working the grill. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt, but no one asked a single question. By the time the sunset bathed the garden in golden light, my father, Robert, stood up and gently tapped his silver spoon against a glass. Everyone immediately fell silent, turning their attention to him. My mother, Margaret, stood beside him, her arm looped through his, beaming. "We have something special to share," my father said in a deep voice, full of pride. "Next week, the whole family is going on vacation to the Florida Keys. A 7-day trip, all booked. There'll be blue water, white sand, and an outdoor party right on a yacht." Cheers erupted like fireworks. Lisa hugged her husband and jumped with excitement. Jack shouted, "Yes! I told you there'd be a surprise." My mom nodded nonstop, her face glowing. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. A vacation. Maybe this was finally my chance to rest after so many years of being the one behind the scenes. I washed my hands, walked toward the table, and gave a polite smile. "When are we leaving? I'll need to adjust my work schedule a bit." The air suddenly felt unnaturally still. Eyes glanced at me, then quickly turned away as if my question had never been asked. My father frowned, his gaze turning cold. "You don't need to know," he said slowly, clearly enough for everyone to hear. "You're not part of us." I thought I misheard. My eyes widened and I froze. My mother scoffed and shrugged, like his words weren't worth caring about. She turned to chat with a distant aunt, leaving me standing in the middle of the yard with empty hands. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to drown out every sound in my head. Then the murmurs picked back up, washing over me like a wave of indifference. I had cleaned the house, made the shopping list, cooked Mom's favorite stew, and ran around to make sure this party went perfectly. And yet, the daughter who gave up a study abroad opportunity to stay home and care for the family when Dad had a stroke, was being treated like an outsider. I don't remember how I slipped away from the crowd. I only realized I was on the porch when I felt my hand gripping my purse tightly. The heavy summer air didn't bother me nearly as much as the weight in my chest. It felt like someone had slammed shut a door I'd been holding open for decades. "Christina, are you okay?" Lisa's voice came from behind, hesitant. I didn't turn around. I opened the wooden gate and walked out, leaving the twinkling lights behind me. Each step down the gravel path toward the garage felt like it was tearing apart the last piece of me that still held on to their kindness. I got into my car, shut the door, and cranked up the AC, trying to blow away everything that had just happened. I didn't cry. I just felt empty, like everything inside me had been drained. I turned on the radio. An old country song came on, singing about leaving a place once called home. I nodded quietly. Maybe it was time for me to leave too. Not to run away, but to start living. I returned to my small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building in the south of Savannah, where every step in the hallway echoed with creaky wood and the scent of nearby meals lingered in the air. The place was only about 430 square feet, but I kept it spotless, my own little corner of the world, untouched by anyone else. I took off my heels, sank into the armchair by the window, and stared into the dark sky. Outside was an empty parking lot, yellow lights reflecting off the hoods of worn-out cars. The party was over. My father's words still echoed in my head like a cut that wouldn't heal. "You're not part of us." I had sacrificed my youth to carry their burdens. At 19, I turned down a full-ride scholarship to stay home and care for Mom after her minor stroke. At 24, I took out a loan to buy Dad's truck when his business went under. At 30, I planned Lisa's wedding, while all she had to do was pick out a dress. I was their shadow, silent, unseen, and no one ever thought to say thank you. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor, pulling out boxes from under the bed, old keepsakes, family photos from when I was a little girl clutching a teddy bear behind Mom's legs, a birthday card I made in 5th grade that no one ever responded to. I had kept everything like proof that I existed in that house. But now, they all felt meaningless. At 3 a.m., I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and pulled an old suitcase from the top of the closet. I didn't need much: a few outfits, my travel camera, a journal, and some essentials. I opened the small drawer by the bed and took out the envelope with the savings I had quietly set aside each month, even though my office job didn't pay much. Nearly $1,200. Not enough for a luxurious new life, but enough to leave this place and breathe on my own terms. I opened Google Maps on my phone, looking at the map of the U.S. with countless little glowing dots, like invitations. I wanted the ocean. I needed the air of freedom, of wide-open spaces where no one gave orders or reminded me to become a version of myself they expected. I remembered a coastal city on the west side of Florida, Clearwater. I had once come across the name in a travel article, a place with soft white sands stretching far and palm trees swaying in the ocean breeze. I had never been there, which only made it more appealing. I booked the earliest bus, 6 a.m. from the Savannah Greyhound station, one way. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and slung my backpack over my shoulder while the sky was still wrapped in a thin layer of fog. The station was quiet, with only a few people scattered around: a woman holding a cat in a fabric bag, a young man wearing headphones staring at his phone. I bought a bland cup of coffee from a vending machine and sat down to wait. The bus arrived, the doors opened, and the driver greeted me with sleepy but friendly eyes. I stepped on, handed over my ticket, and chose a seat by the window. As the wheels began to turn, I looked through the glass and saw my reflection mixed with the dimming streetlights. Savannah faded into the distance, taking with it the years I had once called home. I didn't know what waited for me in Clearwater: a new job, a temporary place to stay, or just days wandering by the sea. But one thing I knew for sure: the place I had just left was no longer home. And this time, I wasn't running. I was choosing. I quietly opened my notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote the first line in firm handwriting. Day 1, I begin again, from myself. I arrived in Clearwater close to noon, the sun high above and the heat rising from the pavement like a foggy mirror. The bus station was small. Just an information desk, a few benches, and a vending machine. I stood still for a moment, gripping the strap of my backpack, looking around the unfamiliar city with my heart pounding. No one knew who I was, and that felt more comforting than I expected. I rented a small room above an old bar called Theo's, less than a 10-minute walk from the beach. The innkeeper, Mr. Theo, a man in his 60s with salt-colored beard and eyes sharp enough to read your thoughts, just waved off my question about ID. Pay a week up front? Around here, everyone's needed a fresh start. My room was a small attic space, just enough for a single bed, a worn wooden desk, and a window facing the parking lot. Downstairs, the bar buzzed every night, but I didn't mind. The music and laughter felt like a different rhythm of life, a sound that reminded me the world was still spinning, and I was now part of a different corner of it. The next morning, I walked barefoot along the beach, my feet sinking lightly into the sand. The salty breeze tangled my hair, but I didn't bother to fix it. I stepped into a small cafe called Misty Beans, sitting on a corner near the harbor with a hand-painted sign and chipped wooden chairs. The girl behind the counter had a chestnut pixie cut and smoky gray eyes. She glanced at me from head to toe, then said without greeting, "We're seriously short on staff. You know how to pull an espresso?" I froze for a second. "I can learn fast." She raised an eyebrow, then tossed me an apron. "I'm Brooke, starting today. Don't spill milk on the steamer. It just got cleaned." I didn't know what made Brooke hire me after just one sentence, but from that moment, I was part of Misty Beans, a little coffee shop full of odd but genuine people. Regulars included fishermen, dock workers, a few musicians who dropped by to play harmonica in the corner, and an older woman who ordered a decaf every morning but never finished it. Brooke was sharp, a bit blunt but not unkind. She worked like a whirlwind, fast, precise, and never polite. But at the end of each shift, she'd quietly leave a whole muffin set aside for me, without saying a word. Maybe that was her way of caring. One afternoon after work, I wandered into a thrift store tucked deep in an alley behind a church. In the darkest corner of the shop, I spotted an old, dusty camera, square-shaped with peeling faux leather at the edges. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. Canon AE1, a film camera I had once dreamed of back in high school. "Want it?" the shop owner asked, voice low and raspy. "Still works, just needs film." I hesitated, then nodded. Buying it wasn't exactly a wise financial move, but I felt like I had just picked up a piece of memory long forgotten. I used to own a similar camera, but I sold it to help Dad pay the electric bill when I was 20. This time, I bought it for myself. That night, I sat on the back steps behind the bar, the first roll of film already loaded. I snapped a few shots, dim streetlights, tree shadows stretching across the pavement, a couple walking by, hand in hand. The photos wouldn't be perfect, the lighting wasn't right, but pressing that shutter made my heart stir to a rhythm I thought I had forgotten. Brooke passed by, eyeing me curiously. "Thought you only knew how to make coffee." I smiled softly, lifted the camera, and snapped a picture of her in the yellow glow. "Turns out I still remember I once had a dream." She didn't say anything, but gave a slight nod, as if she understood more than I had shared. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something inside me slowly coming back to life. Not for anyone else, but because I had finally started listening to myself. One evening after my shift, I was sitting in my cramped attic room, soft yellow light spilling onto a freshly developed photo hanging on the wall. A shot of the dock at sunset, orange blending into purple between the cables stretching across the sky. I had just finished cleaning up and opened a new box of film when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with the words "Emily, little sister." My heart sank. I let it ring a few times before answering, holding it to my ear without saying anything first. Emily's voice came through, full of concern. "Where are you? Everyone's freaking out because you just left like that. Mom said you didn't say a word, just disappeared, like you never existed." I leaned my head against the wall and took a deep breath. Emily was only 19, the only one in the family who had ever asked if I was tired, who once sat with me the whole afternoon when I got sick from overworking while still having to take care of the kids. "I'm okay, and I need this. Not to run away, but to find myself again." I spoke softly, without a hint of anger. "But they're saying all kinds of stuff about you. Mom called you ungrateful. Dad got so mad he smashed the TV remote." Emily paused, then sighed. "You know what? They still planned to go to Florida, but now they're making me stay home to watch the kids. I told them I couldn't, and they said, 'Then call Christina. Tell her to come back and make it right.'" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the story had gotten so old it was almost boring. Make it right? I lived like a shadow in that house for over a decade. What exactly am I making right? I know better than anyone." Emily's voice softened. "But they never see it. They just see you as the one who can handle everything." "And they were wrong," I said firmly. "This time, I'm not coming back to patch up the cracks they made. You need to understand that." Emily was quiet, then whispered, "I miss you." "I miss you too," I replied. "But if I go back, I'll be pulled right back into that role, and I can't live that life again." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she ended the call with a quiet sigh. I stared at the phone for a long time, feeling heavy, but I knew I couldn't falter now. Just 2 days later, while I was wiping tables at Misty Beans, my phone rang again. This time it was Mom. I wasn't going to answer, but then, out of some old reflex I hadn't quite let go of, I swiped the screen. "Christina?" Her voice came through immediately, no greeting. "Do you still care about this family at all? Walking out in the middle of everything? Do you think that was the right thing to do?" I put the rag down and stepped into the back of the shop to get away from the noise. I already said, I need space. I'm not the one who cleans up behind everyone anymore. "Don't raise your voice," Mom snapped. "You've thrown the whole family into chaos. Lisa can't handle all 3 kids. Jack has to work overtime. Who's supposed to watch them? Weren't you always the best at that?" I let out a dry laugh, my voice still calm. Yes, I was good at it. So good that everyone thought it was my duty. But it wasn't. It was a sacrifice. And now I'm choosing not to sacrifice anymore. She paused for a second, then said, cold as ice, "If you walk away this time, don't expect to come back. We don't need selfish people." I swallowed hard, then spoke, my voice steady. "Good. Because I don't need a family that only sees me when they need something. I used to be the pillar that held everyone up, and all I got in return was being forgotten." "Christina," I cut her off. "I spent my whole youth making sure everyone else was okay. I skipped college. I worked 2 jobs. I gave pieces of my life to everyone else. Now, I just want to keep one piece for myself. If that makes me selfish in your eyes, then so be it." I hung up before she could say anything more. My heart was pounding. My hand gripped the phone so tightly my fingertips turned white. Brooke passed by, raising an eyebrow. "You look like you just ran a marathon in the sun. Call home?" I nodded and sighed. "Not easy, but necessary." She smirked and handed me a cold lemonade. "Cut the anchor if you want the boat to float." I gave a faint smile. There was a quiet truth in her joke. I had started to leave the old waters behind, even if the new waves were shaky. At least this time, I was the one steering. That night, after a nearly 10-hour shift, I was just about to head upstairs when Brooke stopped me at the back door of Misty Beans. She had on a denim jacket, a canvas backpack slung over her shoulder, and that familiar half-smile, half-sarcastic look on her face. "Christina," she said, "there's a photography class tonight at the community center near the beach. A friend of mine, Julian, is teaching. You should check it out. Bring that dusty old camera of yours." I blinked in surprise. "I thought you didn't believe I could take a decent photo," she winked. "I still don't. But Julian has an eye. Who knows? Maybe your photos aren't that bad." Instead of going back to my room like usual, I followed her to the community center, a 1-story cream-colored building tucked behind a row of palm trees. The classroom was lit with warm yellow lights, the chairs arranged in a circle, and photographs hung all over the walls. From crashing waves to toothless elderly smiles. Julian was a man in his 40s, with long hair tied back and ink stains always on his hands. He looked at me, then at the camera in my hand, and smiled. "Canon AE1, a classic choice," he said. "You shot before?" "I did, but it's been a long time," I replied, my voice low. "Then it's perfect timing," Julian nodded. "This class isn't about turning anyone into a pro. We just want to help people see the things they've forgotten to notice." That evening's class had no dry theory, no overwhelming techniques, just conversations about light, emotion, and the stories hidden in every image. Julian gave me my first assignment. Photograph something you can't forget. I went out to the beach early the next morning, camera in hand, heart feeling empty. I didn't know what to shoot. But then, in that moment when the light filtered through the beams of the old pier, I raised the camera. That became the first shot in a series of photos capturing pieces of what shaped me. A rusted bike abandoned by a fence. A young mother pushing a stroller while holding a second child in her arms. Sandals neatly lined up outside someone's front door. Each image felt like a whisper from memory. Distant, yet achingly familiar. Julian started paying more attention to me. He would linger longer in front of the photos I brought in. One day, he said, "Christina, your photos have something real. Not perfect, but honest. You should think about putting them into a set." I was a bit unsure. "You mean, like an exhibit?" He nodded. "There's a local photo showcase next month. The theme is me and the pieces I carry." "I think your work fits." I spent a whole week thinking it over. But one night, flipping through my developed negatives, I realized the set had its own rhythm. A story without words. I titled it, "Roots and Wings," because I had once clung so tightly to where I came from, but now I was learning how to fly away. The day of the exhibit took place in a renovated warehouse turned art space. My photos were displayed on a panel of raw wood. The lights above cast shadows onto each frame. I wore a simple pale blue dress, my hair loosely pinned up, standing among strangers, each sipping wine slowly. Julian came over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "You've stepped out of your shadow." An older woman stopped in front of the photo I took of the rusty bike. She turned to me and asked, "Did you take this?" I nodded. She smiled, her eyes slightly glassy. It reminded me of my childhood. I had a bike just like that. "Thank you." Just those 3 words, "thank you," made something inside me tremble. For the first time, something I created, not for anyone else, not out of duty, but for myself, had touched someone else. That night, I left the exhibit after the streetlights had come on. Brooke waved at me from a distance, raising a soda can in celebration. Julian shook my hand and told me a small gallery was considering inviting me to join a street photography series. I walked along the beach, the waves gently brushing the shore. Inside, there were no more questions like, do I deserve this, or what would they think if they saw me here? In their place was something simple but whole. I was heading in the right direction. And for the first time in many years, I knew with certainty the place where I belonged wasn't where people needed me to do everything. It was where I got to be myself. One afternoon in early April, I was behind the counter at Misty Beans, quickly whipping up a round of lattes for a group of tourists from New Jersey, when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, out of habit, and as soon as my eyes hit the doorway, I froze. He stood there. Robert Mitchell, a tall man with neatly combed salt and pepper hair, wearing the same old plaid shirt I had ironed for him hundreds of times. My father. He didn't look around the shop, didn't greet anyone, just stared straight at me, as if nothing else existed in the room filled with the smell of coffee and quiet chatter but him and me. I set the latte down on the tray, wiped my hands on a cloth, and stepped out from behind the counter. My heart pounded, like part of me hadn't quite prepared for this moment. But my feet didn't tremble, not like they used to. "You came a long way," I said calmly. "Clearwater's over 400 miles from Savannah." My father cleared his throat, his gaze stiff. "We need to talk." I signaled to Brooke. She nodded and took over the counter without a word. I led my father to the back of the shop, where a wooden bench sat under a low-hanging palm tree, sunlight flickering through the leaves and scattering patterns across the ground. Dad sat down first, slowly, as if carrying the weight of something heavy. I sat across from him, arms folded. Your mother's very disappointed," he began, his voice not loud but heavy enough to weigh down the air. "The Florida trip was canceled. Lisa couldn't handle the 3 kids. Jack got into a fight with his wife and left for 3 days. Everything's a mess." I looked at him, neither nodding nor shaking my head. Just silent. "We didn't expect you to just walk away like that," he continued, "without saying a word. It's like the family means nothing to you anymore." I gave a thin smile without a trace of sarcasm. And what about that day? When you told me I wasn't part of the family? Was I supposed to stay, keep wiping tables, holding babies, and faking smiles while you all ignored me during the vacation? His face twitched slightly, but he didn't argue. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in him. The man who always believed he had the right to raise his voice, make decisions, and pile every burden onto me without a single thank you. You don't know how much you've sacrificed, he said, a little softer. I nodded. You're right. You don't know. Because when I withdrew my application to study photography in Boston to stay home and care for Mom, you said it was the natural thing to do. When I gave Lisa all my savings for her wedding, Mom said it was what the eldest sister should do. But now, no one's left to carry the load. And no one knows what to do. I leaned back against the bench, looking him straight in the eye. I'm not angry. Not anymore. But I'm also not obligated to come back and patch up a life everyone assumed I'd always be there to save. He stayed quiet for a long time. For a moment, I thought he might blow up, stand up and walk away. But instead, he just exhaled slowly. I didn't realize how much this hurt you. I was surprised by that sentence, not because he apologized, he still hadn't, but because for the first time he admitted he hadn't known. It was the first crack in the wall I thought would never change. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice lower now. Rebuilding my life, working at a cafe, learning photography again. I had my first exhibition last week. Someone bought one of my photos. He tilted his head slightly, a shift in his eyes. I didn't know you were still taking pictures. I smiled faintly. You never asked. We sat a few more minutes in silence. The wind rustled through the palm leaves, carrying the salty air and the faint sound of music from the cafe. Finally, he stood up. He didn't reach out, didn't say anything sentimental. The door at home's still open if you want to come back. I stood too, not nodding, not promising. I just said, I am home, Dad, right here. He gave a small nod, one I couldn't tell was out of acceptance or reluctance. But whatever it was, as his figure disappeared behind the row of buildings, I felt a part of the weight in my chest lift. I hadn't gotten angry, hadn't run, hadn't caved in. I had said everything I needed to say. And most importantly, I no longer felt like I owed them anything. I went back inside the cafe, where the smell of coffee was still warm and customers' laughter still filled the air. Brooke raised an eyebrow when she saw me come in. You okay? I nodded, my smile small but certain. Better than ever. 2 weeks after seeing Dad, I received an email from a local art gallery called Babysit Collective. They had attended the photo showcase at the community center and were especially drawn to the Roots and Wings collection. In the email, they invited me to display several of my photos in the upcoming summer exhibition, a yearly event that draws both locals and visitors from all over to Clearwater. I read the email 3 times, my heart pounding. For the first time in my life, a door I thought I'd missed forever had opened in the most unexpected way. No more, Christina, can you help out? Or, hey, can you watch the kids for a bit? But Christina, the photographer. I brought the news to the cafe, planning to tell Brooke after my shift. But the moment I stepped into the prep kitchen, she turned around with a look that said she already knew everything. You got the invite from Babysit, didn't you? She asked, one hand pouring milk, the other pressing the espresso grinder. I blinked. How'd you know? Julian's terrible at keeping secrets, she smirked. Anyway, I told you, you have the eye of someone who's lived in silence. I didn't answer right away. But later, back in that dim attic room, I sat down and opened the leather notebook I used to jot down a line or two each day. On a fresh page, I wrote, I've stepped out of the shadows and the light doesn't scare me anymore. 3 days later, I got a text from Emily. Just one line. They're planning a trip to Hawaii. This time, Mom hired a babysitter. I looked at the message, feeling something old and dusty dissolve inside me. Not bitterness, not regret, just a clear awareness. They figured it out without me. They didn't need me. And that wasn't as sad as I once thought. I replied simply, "Have a great trip. Take care of yourself." Emily sent back a smiley face, then silence. But that was enough. I knew she understood, and I no longer needed to prove anything. The Baylight Collective exhibit took place on a breezy May afternoon, with cool sea air drifting through the tourist-filled streets. The gallery space was inside a renovated warehouse. White walls, bare wooden floors, and warm yellow lighting like late sunlight. My photos were displayed in the last section, 5 in total, arranged along the length of a journey. The first was a shot of an empty pier at sunset, symbolizing separation. The final one was a photo I took of Brooke standing beneath the palm tree behind the cafe, holding a cup of coffee and smiling. Soft light falling on her hair like an unnamed piece. I stood quietly watching people pass by, their eyes lingering on the photos. No one knew who I was, and I liked that. I was no longer Big Sister Christina, the one who handles everything. I was a storyteller. Through light and time. A middle-aged woman stopped in front of the palm tree and stood there for a while. She turned to me and asked softly, "Did you take this?" I nodded. She gently touched her chest and smiled. "I don't know why, but this photo makes me want to go home." I thanked her, though my throat tightened. It was the first time someone truly felt what I tried to capture. That sense of being lost, then finding yourself again through something simple. An hour later, a gallery representative came to find me, announcing that the old pier, the first photo in the Roots and Wings series, had been purchased by a collector from New Orleans. $200. Not a large sum, but to me, it was a quiet confirmation that I had done the right thing. That night, I left the gallery with an envelope of cash in my hand and unformed dreams in my head. I stopped by Misty Beans. Brooke was cleaning up the last of the cups. "Can I buy you a cappuccino?" I asked, half joking. She glanced at me. "I thought you were a big-shot artist now, coming back to play barista?" I laughed. "No. I came back because this place is part of the journey. And I still love coffee." We sat by the window, streetlights sparkling outside. I told her about the woman at the gallery, the photo buyer, and how I no longer felt the pull to return to the things that once held me down. "You've found your freedom," Brooke said, her voice soft like waves. I didn't answer. I just looked out at the street, where an old bicycle rolled past under the lights, leaving a trail of shimmer like a never-ending current. I knew, from that moment on, I wasn't going back. Because this life, simple as it may be, windswept as it still is mine. Leaving my family wasn't something I ever imagined I'd do, but the moment they pushed me out of their world, another door opened, the one that led to freedom. I am no longer the one who carries the weight, no longer the shadow behind their expectations. Now, I live my own life with my old camera, mornings by the sea, and a quiet peace in my heart. I don't regret it, because for the first time, I'm not living to please anyone else. I'm living to be myself. What do you think about Christina's journey? Have you ever felt the same way she did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, honest stories about family and life.